Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivacharya Ashtotra Sadasi Śrīmad Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Ki Samaveta Bhaktivedanta Ki Janitai Gaur Premanande All glories to assembled devotees All glories to assembled devotees All glories to assembled devotees All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga All glories to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshataya Today we are continuing to read from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 31, titled The Movements of the Living Entities. Text number 14. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। यः पंचभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मनोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषयो पुमांसम्। यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मकोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषयो पुमांसम्। यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मनोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषयो पुमांसम्।
यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मकोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषयो पुमांसम्। यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मकोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषो पुमांसम्। यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मकोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषाय पुमांसम्।
माताजी
यः पञ्चभूतरचिते रहिता शरीरे चन्नो यतेन्द्रियगुणार्थचिदात्मकोऽहम् तेनाविकुन्तमहिमानं ऋषिं तमेनं वन्दे परं प्रकृतिपुरुषाय पुमांसम्।
Vande Param Prakati Puruṣaya Pumamsam.
Word to word translation. Ya, who, Panchabhuta, five gross elements, Rachite, made of, Rahitaha, separated, Sharire, in the material body, Shannaha, covered, Ayata, unfitly, Indriya, senses, Guna, qualities, Artha, objects of senses, Chit, ego, Atmakaha, consisting of, Aham, I, Tena, by material body, Avikunta Mahimanam, whose glories are unobscured, Rishim, all-knowing, Tam, that, Enam, unto him, Vande, I offer obeisances, Param, transcendental, Prakriti, to material nature, Puruṣayo, to the living entities, Pumamsam, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. I am separated from the Supreme Lord because of my being in this material body, which is made of five elements, and therefore my qualities and senses are being misused, although I am essentially spiritual. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is transcendental to material nature and the living entities, because he is devoid of such a material body, and because he is always glorious in his spiritual qualities, I offer my obeisances unto him. Purport. The difference between the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is that the living entity is prone to be subjected to material nature, whereas the Supreme Godhead is always transcendental to material nature as well as to the living entities. When the living entity is put into material nature, then his senses and qualities are polluted or designated. There is no possibility for the Supreme Lord to become embodied by material qualities or material senses, for he is above the influence of material nature and cannot possibly be put in the darkness of ignorance like the living entities. Because of his full knowledge, he is never subjected to the influence of material nature. Material nature is always under his control, and it is therefore not possible that material nature can control the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since the identity of the living entity is very minute, he is prone to be subjected to material nature, but when he is freed from this material body, which is false, he attains the same spiritual nature as the Supreme Lord. At that time, there is no qualitative difference between him and the Supreme Lord, but because he is not quantitatively powerful as to never be put under the influence of material nature, he is quantitatively different from the Lord. The entire process of devotional service is to purify oneself of this contamination of material nature and put oneself on the spiritual platform where he is qualitatively one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Vedas, it is said that the living entity is always free. Asango hi ayam Puruṣaha. The living entity is liberated. His material contamination is temporary and his actual position is that he is liberated. This liberation is achieved by Krishna consciousness, which begins from the point of surrender. Therefore, it is said here, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Person. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana-Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsya Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Namaste. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dīnabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patithanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivedanta. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are looking at the transformation of the living entity, one of the 6 transformations that the living entity goes through. And the first transformation the living entity goes through is birth. So when we read about the qualities of soul, and Krishna describes that in 2nd chapter, Ajayate Mriyate Va Kadachan. So in the purport, Prabhupada explains how body undergoes all these transformations, and the first one is birth. So that which is explained in one word, birth, here Bhagavatam gives step-by-step details. Possibly leave the door open a little bit. Just a little bit. At least some air coming. So the one word birth is elaborated here as to how the living entity, which is pure spiritual nature, is starting to get different coverings. When you are actually ordering a shirt or a pant, they take your measurements and then they start making it according to you. At that time you give the measurement, and then what if that stitching process is happening when you are actually inside the cloth? That's what is happening now, graphically, how the living entity is actually seeing and it is experiencing how all the coverings are being put on it. And especially one of the words that's used in this word-to-word translation, it is not fitting, it is unfit. But still it is being put on it. Second example I thought to understand this is, now that the construction is going on, almost come to a finish, and still some construction is going on. Now as an observer, you are able to see how things are put together and then construction is going on. What if they put you in the center and then they build wall, then cement, then concrete, and all the layers are built around you? Even the thought of that is very horrifying. How your pure consciousness is being covered by different layers. And that word used is covered, channaha, and it is ayata, it is unfittingly being covered. And this is nicely explained by Prahlad Maharaj when he shares what he learned in his mother's womb. When he is explaining this to his fellow students, it is said in this 7th canto, 7th chapter, 18th verse, this is Prahlad Maharaj speaking. Just as the fruits and flowers of a tree in due course of time undergo 6 changes: birth, existence, growth, transformation, dwindling, and then death. The material body, which is obtained by the spirit soul under different circumstances, undergoes similar changes. However, there are no such changes for the spirit soul. The purport, Srila Prabhupada brings out how the example is relevant and how the human birth takes place. The birth of a human being's material body takes place due to a mixture of ovum and semen, but the history of birth is that although the ovum and semen mix together after sex, there is not always pregnancy. Unless the soul enters the mixture, there is no possibility of pregnancy. But when the soul takes shelter of the mixture, the body takes birth, exists, grows, transforms, and dwindles. And ultimately it is vanquished. The fruits and flowers of a tree seasonally come and go, but the tree continues to stand. Similarly, the transmigrating soul accepts various bodies which undergo 6 transformations. But the soul remains permanently the same. Ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. The soul is ever existing, eternal, but the bodies are accepted by the soul are changing. Now, why is the spirit soul getting different layers, which we were described earlier? So, first 10 days there is a particular shape, and then after a month the head is formed. So I thought of remembering, so there is only one head that is formed in the first month, okay, and there are 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, they are getting formed in the second month. It's just a way for me to remember. So different organs are given to you, and now it is being delivered. So if it is getting delivered to you, somebody must have placed the order, right? And it is explained that the desires of the living entity is the order, and nature is giving you. Here is what you asked for, now take it. And it is now being delivered in different phases. So you can understand who is actually asking for it, and now who is actually experiencing it. Now after we receive something, so yesterday I got a parcel from eBay. After it's delivered, I cannot say to the postman, no, I don't want it. But the spirit soul here understands that this is not my actual situation. And he is engaged in an activity which is prayer. Acharya is right as to how a spirit soul, if he is doing a particular activity throughout his life, he will do it at the womb of his mother as well. There they describe how a person who is very karmic and who is engaged in fruitive activities, in the mother's womb he will get a remembrance of previous lot of his births. A jnani jiva might be doing speculation, but here we see the jiva is actually offering prayers, and these prayers are very profound in the sense that the constitutional position of the soul is clearly explained, and the soul doesn't think itself to be equal to the Lord. It is saying, Lord, you are beyond this material creation, and therefore I take shelter of you. So, coming back to the point about how the body, which is stated in the Bhagavad Gita as the city of 9 gates, how that is created, it's explained in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 21st verse. Nature is said to be the cause of all material, cause and effect, whereas the living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Karya karna kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate. Puruṣa sugha dukkhanam bhoktritve hetu uchyate. So, the birth and actually getting all these different layers are happening because of the living entities' inclinations or the desires. And Prabhupada explains about this in his purport in 5th canto, 11th chapter, 11th verse. Prabhupada brings about the point that these combinations are not happening just by chance. So many factors are involved. The living entity is desiring, and the material nature is providing all the ingredients, and then it is given to the living entity. Prabhupada says, one should not think that all the interactions of the physical elements, gross and subtle, that cause the transformation of mind and consciousness are working independently. They are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Under His direction, everything takes place. Now here is the answer to our question, what is our role in this? The different inclination of the living entity are created by his own nature or his expectations, and he is trained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the agency of material nature. So you ask for it, and now it is getting delivered to you, and every month in the mother's womb, the child is getting different layers, layer after layer after layer, gross, and we'll see how even the subtle layers are also built in. So these transformations of the living entity is happening. Why? Because he is starting to identify with all these material elements, which are 8 kind of material elements. So as we all know, there are 5 gross elements: earth, water, fire, air and ether. That gross elements, and then there is mind, intelligence and false ego. So a spirit soul is undergoing transformation because he is starting to identify with all these elements in a gross and subtle way. So the 6 transformations are happening because of identification, and gradually you start to get different kinds of senses. So you get working senses, then knowledge acquiring senses, then the subtle senses also. So you get senses of perception, which is hearing, touch, sight, smell and taste. Then for action we get hands, legs, speech. Then we get reproductive organs, and then the organs for evacuation. And this is what was described earlier. Because the living entity is starting to interact, it is getting all these kind of covering. So 6 transformations happen, and you interact with the 8 elements, and then you get 13 type of senses. So a lot of mathematics going on here. So 6 transformation, 8 kind of elements, then 13 kind of senses, and it's not stopped there yet. So we'll continue where there are more numbers coming up. So again, he is given 7 kind of bodily layers. So this is described in prayers by the demigods to Lord Krishna in the womb. So the living entity gets 7 kind of gross bodily layers, again which are described in this chapter: skin, flesh, bone, muscles, marrow, fat and semen. Now comes the covering, which is related to the mind, and then how the conditioning happens at the level of mind. At the level of mind, as we saw earlier in creation, every sense organ is governed by a particular demigod, and the mind is governed by moon. And accordingly, you will get a mentality where you are first in the platform of looking for food, Annamaya, where your consciousness is fully at the level of where will I get my next food, and that's how much you can think about. Then you start to think about moving, Pranamaya, where you start to think about moving and there is some action getting involved. Then comes the level of Vijnanamaya, where you're starting to discriminate, then you're getting a clear perception of what is right, what is wrong, and then you're going to the level of Anandamaya, where you're starting to ask questions about self-realization and you are seeking happiness. So now what we are seeing is the living entity is seeing the outside world through all these 9 gates, and then the conceptions that are being imposed. And our best friend in this material world, Maya Devi, she controls with the 3 modes, and she has her 2 potencies, which are, as we all know, Avanatmika and Prakshepatmika. So what she does is, through the prakshepatmika power, she makes you feel that this material world and sense gratification is all in all, and you can be happy here. And by the avranatmika potency, she makes you think that this is your actual identity. The spiritual identity is first covered, and then you start to identify, or you start to interact with this world, because naturally you are pleasure seeking, and now your field of activity is in this material world, so you start to seek pleasure through these different coverings that are given to you. She doesn't leave it there. She takes up her whip and lashes it. And there are 6 material whips which are described, and which the child also start to feel: hunger, thirst, lamentation, illusion, old age and death. Now, while the living entity is trying to seek happiness, he is actually slowly starting to become conditioned. By conditioning, what we mean is there is a sense of satisfaction, and before you get satisfied, there is an action. So before there is an action, also there is a stimulus. So stimulus for acting. So to understand this, Srihotra Swami has given this illustration of how dogs were actually trained in a way that whenever there is a time to feed them, they started to ring a bell, and food was given after that. So now over a period, the dogs understood that, okay, bell means it is related to food. Now at a particular stage, they stopped feeding the dog, and just they started to ring the bell, and the dog started to salivate. The saliva started to come in their mouth. So just by creating the environment where you not even got the actual object which you are desiring, but still you're starting to experience some kind of a satisfaction, that is called as conditioning. So Maya Devi puts us in this, and conditioning starts to happen in the way that you start to interact with the field of activities, and then you're starting to experience pleasure even though it is actually not giving you actual pleasure. So that's how we understand how the point about the living entity being polluted, designated, and how his senses and qualities are becoming polluted. So each organ is given for like a specific purpose. Now living entities, when they are given eyes, by that what happens is we all have a sense to own an object. So just by seeing, the desire to own the object comes into our mind. So that's like a window through which you start to see, and the desires to own the object comes into your mind. Then the organs for production is given. Why? Because living entities by nature, they want to create something. The creative ability is there, and that is why reproductive organs are given. And that's how we see how the child is also starting to get different types of organs. The sense of hearing is given so that you can hear about things and start to make plans for the future. Okay, I want to go to USA, I heard about a nice spot there. So you hear about it, and then you are making future plans about it. So each organ in a way is a window by which you acquire more and more desires, and you want to enjoy, and those desires are actually going to create more and more bodies that you want to enjoy in the future. So that is the purpose by which the different organs are there. And gradually what's happening is the living entity is becoming ignorant. So the ignorance is again twofold, where one becomes ignorant of his own spiritual identity. So by the facts that I described, you would have forgotten by now that you are a servant of Krishna, but that's your actual identity. So ignorance also has like two layers, Maya is implicating. One, you forget your spiritual identity and you're starting to seek pleasure in this material world. And second ignorance is that you're ignorant of the Lord's form. So by this time you'd have totally forgotten who Lord is, how He looks like, and forget about even thinking about serving Him. If you don't know who He is, how you are going to think about serving Him? So that's the extent to which ignorance is put on us. Where first we forget our spiritual identity, then we forget who Lord is. So totally the coverings are very tight, the modes are acting, then the whips are being applied and they are giving some pains, and we've forgotten who we are, and we have forgotten the Lord as well. But here we see that the living entity is offering a lot of prayers to the Lord, being situated even in a material body. When I was thinking about this point, within the mother's womb, the child doesn't even know whether it is a male or a female. The parents may know through some scan, but the child itself is not aware of its gender. The child is not aware which country I am going to take birth in. Different sense organs are there, but what is happening? The field of activity is very, very limited. Within the mother's womb, you can't see outside, so you can't go shopping, you can't do this, you can't walk. So all the activities of the senses are constrained. And if the food is supplied, you eat. It is whatever is supplied on his own accord, you take and you survive. And the rest of the time, who is with you? The soul understands that, Acharya is right as to how the soul understands that I have been in this place many, many times. I have seen many wombs and I have come out of it. Now again I have landed up here. Now I must make a permanent solution. At that time, as described in yesterday's verse, a repentant mind can attract the mercy of the Lord. So the super soul is also within the city of 9 gates. Now because there are sense organs are there, but they are not diverting you in different directions, as Prahlad Maharaj describes. One organ, the eyes are wanting to see some nice objects, the hands want to touch something, the belly wants to eat even though it is full. So Prahlad Maharaj describes how each organ is distracting him. Although he is a liberated person, he is praying like that. But in this case of Jiva, in the mother's womb, all the activities are restricted. The only thing that you can do is interact with the super soul. And this Jiva, fortunate enough, he is offering prayers. That is when the purificatory process of bhakti starts to kick in. That's the second half of the purport. Prabhupada explains the entire process of devotional service is to purify oneself of the contamination. The beauty of bhakti process is that even if the environment that you are in is very, very unclean, that which the jiva has now been in, it's described how abominable it is. But still, the jiva can do an activity of bhakti which is pray to the Lord. So no external environment, however impure it is, can put an impediment on a person who is trying to practice bhakti. So there is no excuse for us who are now grown up, even if we are in an environment where it is impure, and it is said Kali Yuga, obviously there will be a lot of impurities, the process of bhakti will still work. So with the process of bhakti, what happens is you have starting to experience a transformation of your consciousness. We saw how the entire birth is because of transformation of consciousness. And the chief agent for us to get into this material body is described is the mind. So for us to get out of this material world, again, we'll have to use the same material mind and use the same process of attachment, but to a different person. For that, first we need to break the layers of ignorance. So that is why the bhakti process begins with chanting. So the chanting process, the chanting of the mantras breaks through the layers of ignorance. And you are at least theoretically told about what your spiritual identity is. You get an idea about how to live in this city of 9 gates, and you will get this knowledge by a person who is also similarly living in the city of 9 gates but who is next to you. So the Lord is merciful enough to send spiritual masters who are liberated, but still they are also living in the same body that we are in, similar to what we have, but they are liberated. So they introduce us the process of bhakti, which begins with chanting. And from there onwards, your transformation of consciousness happens. Because this transformation of consciousness is not like a Microsoft product. You do something, you type something, no, control is that, it will go away. It's going to be a long process. So the guidance of a living person is required for you to go through that entire process of purification. Now, the purification happens in the mind at different levels. Because mind, as we know, functions in the level of thinking, feeling and willing. At the level of thinking, now you start to observe things and then you come to a conclusion. So you perceive things to direct sense perception or by making inferences. So now the bhakti process, what it does is it is giving engagements to different senses of the body. So when we come to temple, we smell the flowers, we smell the incense, and then we touching the temple hall, we touch the feet of the spiritual master, we bow down in front of the deities, we see the form of the Lord. Now your senses are starting to perceive spiritual objects, and thereby the purification is happening. So at the level of sense purification of the senses, the process is comprehensive enough that it has addressed every level of your sense perception. Everything is covered by the process of bhakti. Now, an additional or way of perceiving things is through the eyes of knowledge. That's why we say Om Ajnana Timirandasya. So what the spiritual master does is he is opening your darkened eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. So you are starting to see things in this world from a different point of view. And the spiritual master engages you in devotional service when performed with proper attention. It gives you access to a different level of perception, which is called Divya Pratyaksha. Means the Lord says, I will give you the intelligence. Even if you don't have, I will give that.
Yeah.
Instead of, Jnana Chakshus. So you are able to perceive things from a different level. So at the level of thinking, you're not only perceiving through your senses, but the Lord is also helping. Now, in the stage of willing, which is actually doing the activities, Lord says, what are the activities that I want you to do and what are the activities that you should not perform. So you're getting an idea of what should be done, what should not be done. And thereby you align your activities so that it matches the will of the Lord. That is how you get out of the cycle of karma. Now, in the activity side of it, Bhakti again has our spiritual sadhana, which is activities like hearing, chanting, and cleaning of the temple, decorating. So we have got a lot of activities in which the senses are engaged. And in this connection we have this famous verse by Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayu. Rasika Prabhu, you can chant that verse.
Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayu Vasamsi Vaikunta Gunanu Mardana Hare Mandira Marjanadishu Shruti Chakara Chuta Satkathodare.
So, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayu. So, mind is fixed on the feet of the Lord. Vasamsi. So, the words are describing the glories of Vaikunta Gunanu Varnane. Karau Hare Mandira Marjana. So, the hands are engaged in cleansing the temple. Shrutim. So, the ears are hearing. Now, by this hearing process, we understand what is right, what is wrong. So, now we are starting to get the discrimination power to know what is right, what is wrong. And you can curb your action. So, that is why the 4 gateways to hell are blocked in devotional service. So that's why no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, no meat eating. So the activities, the sinful activities are prevented and devotional activities are engaged. So from the side of activities, bhakti, there's so much to do and there are things to avoid. And the top of all these, the third side of mind is the feeling. Natural emotions that are there, that actually has more power than the other 2 sides of the mind, thinking and willing. If you love somebody, you will go any extent to do an activity which they like. So Bhakti Yoga, what it does is, it takes the natural emotion of a living entity which is now directed towards material objects, and he is experiencing a jada rasa. He is experiencing some taste. So Bhakti Yoga, what it does is, it takes that feelings of the living entity and asks him to direct towards a person, as that supreme person who is the reservoir of all pleasure. Akila Rasamrita Murti. So you are asked to develop loving feeling towards that supreme person, because the most healthiest emotion that a person can have is loving God. So once a person gets that healthiest emotion, and once that driving factor is there, then you will naturally be willing to do activities and your thinking will be in that way. For example, if you are given a project which is going to please the Lord and please your spiritual master, and that is how you engage your thinking, you start to think how to execute it, you start to plan, like for example, like book distribution or other activities. Now that you have something to do, then all your activities are starting to fall in place. You will regulate your senses, you will start to plan, you will use your creative ability. It is said how every ashram there is creative ability. The brahmacharya ashram and sannyas ashram, the creative ability is used by coming up with various ideas by which the Krishna consciousness can be spread. So, painting is also a creative ability. And when that is done to paint the form of the Lord, then that becomes spiritual. So by developing this emotional side very, very strongly, Bhakti Yoga is giving you this control over the other 2 sides, whereby you are willing to do an activity because you are emotionally attached to Guru and Krishna. Initially, the spontaneous attraction won't be there, but we start to do it as a matter of duty. So that's why the sadhana bhakti is there. By that, you start to develop a longing for the Supreme Lord. Now your object of attraction, the place from where you get your pleasure, is now changing from material field of activities to a spiritual field of activities. And thereby you are slowly getting out of the different layers. Those layers which are actually restricting you, those elements which are actually restricting, when they are offered in the service of Lord. For example, in the Arati we offer different items. Each item represents a different element. And by doing that activity, even a person who is observing the Arati gets purified. You don't have to do the actual Arati. If you see the form of the Lord, when somebody is offering the Arati, you get purified. When you smell the flowers of the Lord, you get purified. When the darshan of the Lord happens in the street, Ratha Yatra, somebody sees, he gets purified. So the purification aspect is also there at the level of tongue, at the level of mind. So now, even if you are in the Annamaya platform, you can still become purified because we can attract you to eat prasadam. If you want to do some activities, you are in that active mode, okay, come, and then you can be engaged in activities related to bhakti, like cleaning the temple. And if you want to read, and there is a lot of literatures at the level of Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, then at the level of Anandamaya, where you see that I am getting a superior taste by redirecting my love towards the Lord, and you start to give up. So gradually, by transforming your object of taste, and that's how you transform your consciousness as well. So desires in themselves cannot be killed. So desires have to be purified. By purifying the desires and engaging them, you're purifying your consciousness. By purifying the consciousness, you actually get out of these limitations imposed by the material elements in terms of the 7 layers and all the coverings that we discussed before. And you are able to get out. So that's how we understand that the Lord, who is a master of the city of 9 gates, by rendering devotion to Him, we can get out of this city of 9 gates. And that's what the living entity is doing in these prayers. I'll stop here. Sorry for bombarding with so many details. It's just to illustrate how thick the covering is and how much we are bound by. So, any questions? Yes,
you were saying that when we advance in our devotional service, slowly our desires will change, like from material desires to spiritual desires. Will your passions as well go away?
good question. When our desires change from material to spiritual desires, will our impressions also change? That's also a part which I wanted to cover, which we did not have time. Bhakti is actually creating more and more impressions in your mind. And what's actually happening is, if I'm putting more spiritual desires and your mind can hold only a certain amount of capacity, what will happen to the material desires is they will slowly go away. If you don't act on the material desires, just like if I leave water in a cup for many days, it will evaporate by itself. Nobody acted on it. Similarly, material desires, when left untouched, it will go away. What is happening in the background is, you are busy fulfilling your spiritual desires. Material desires and impressions are ignored for longer period of times, and you are simultaneously acting rigorously on your spiritual desires. You are thinking, feeling and acting and all that, and you are stopping to thinking, feeling and willing on the material impressions. Thereby, it is getting neglected and new impressions are being created simultaneously, so they will eventually go away. So that's why we see how the process of samskaras are important. So that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, Prabhu, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you for a very nice lecture. As Prabhupada started in the first verse,
Yes.
331:1.
Karmana Dev.
Karmana Dev Netrena. By the karma,
Yes.
we are getting the Netrena. So we are getting a body from the karma actually.
Yeah.
And it's described in 5 stages. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, Vijnanamaya also there.
Yeah.
And then
Anandamaya.
and we have to have the higher taste, Vishya Vimvartante, Dhanamani. So tell us a bit more about the emotional development, how we become quickly spiritual from material development.
Question is how to become quickly getting out of material desires. Depends on which level of consciousness you are in.
Because you said bhakti. Bhakti means rati to Bhagavan.
Yes.
Attachment to Lord.
Yeah.
So how do we get attachment to the Lord?
So can you describe the person who is trying to get attachment? What is his level of consciousness?
As you said, chanting first thing.
No, I am asking you a question to answer your question better. What is the level of the consciousness that a person is who is trying to develop this attraction? What is his level of consciousness?
That comes from the...
No, what is he situated in which platform? Accordingly, the process can vary. That's what I'm trying to say. If he is in an Annamaya platform, we can give him certain activities. He can proceed quickly by taking prasadam. Then if he's in another platform, then we can give him activities to do. So it depends on the person. But the 5 potent activities as I described by Srila Prabhupada, that's described in Nectar of Devotion, like Murti Sevaya, Bhagavata Shravana, then chanting of the holy name, then residing in a holy place. That would be the food and Murti, yeah. So they are designed to develop those dormant emotions inside you. Yeah, his hand is up.
Bhagavad Gita chapter 11, the Lord says that I have already killed all these Kauravas in the battlefield. Then how are they alive?
How are they alive? So I'll probably answer this. I'll answer this after I answer this question. I'll take questions relevant to today's class. Then we'll come to your question. Is it okay? Yeah. Yes.
Prove how it mentioned that soul, how it comes into the body, it comes to the brain and then goes to brain.
Yes.
Soul is always active and super soul is always with it. So when it is in the form of grains, how does it do? What does it do? It is already active, always active.
Yeah, so the question is, the soul which is always active comes from the rain to the grain and then it enters the male body and then now what will happen, what's happening to the soul when it is in the form of a grain?
It's getting cooked.
Then the super soul is also with that grain, so what will happen? Okay. So you are active, but if the covering around you is very thick, you cannot act beyond a certain level. Right, so the covering is so thick that soul by nature is active, but it is unable to act. So if I ask you to sit in a car where there is no petrol, all the 4 tires are taken off, and you have a car. You are active, but the car is not active. So you are put into that particular situation, but such amount of covering that you are not being active. Any other question related to today's?
If you could please repeat the levels of Annamaya, Jnanamaya, the level of consciousness, if you could please.
Yeah, Annamaya, Pranamaya. The levels of consciousness. Annamaya, Prabhu answered that. You can repeat, Prabhu. What are the levels of consciousness?
Yeah, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, Vijnanamaya, and last one is Anandamaya.
Anandamaya, okay.
That's what we eat, Anandamaya.
Okay. I'll open up Krishna's question to everybody. Krishna is asking, in 11th chapter, it's described how the soldiers are already killed by Krishna, but how are they still alive? Anybody likes to answer this question? Anyone can answer.
Because their destiny has been written that they, no matter what they do in the battle, they will be still defeated by Lord's desire. So Arjun becomes just an instrument in the desire of Lord to fulfill and kill those soldiers. So what it means simply by saying that their destiny is already set. No matter how much they fight, they will not overcome dharma because they're standing aside for dharma. So he's just predicting their future, that they have been already killed. The result is already decided. Matches things. That's what it means.
So in the present tense, they are not killed. In the future, towards the end of the battle, Krishna is describing, I have already killed them, in the sense we need to understand from the context. Yes, as Prabhu was mentioning, they will eventually get killed. And who is the actual doer of those activities is Krishna. In that sense, Krishna is saying, I have killed them all. Because for him there is no past, present or future, when he can see through all that. And he says, okay, it's a matter of few days they're going to get killed. So I've already killed them. Now you just be nimitta matram. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Okay. Hare Krishna.
How can we visualize it when we say like the moon is in charge of the mind, this demigod is in charge of the eyes, this demigod is in charge of the hands? How can we
How can we visualize?
Yeah.
How can we visualize when we read statements like the moon is the in charge of a particular organ of your body? Okay, now that you've come from Germany, when you enter Australia, you have to go through different departments, right? Department of Immigration, then there is Customs, and they want to check different aspects of you. And even when you are within Australia, the rules of Australia are controlling you. And when you are in the road rules are, you have to follow the road rules. When you're driving the car, the rules of Vic roads you have to follow. And there is a person behind all that who's doing. Similarly, in this material world, which is not your original position, now you have to act under the control of different people who you may not see them, but still you have to follow their rules. And by reading, we understand that each organ is controlled by a different demigod. Scriptures give us that mapping is given so that ultimately for all the demigods the controller is Krishna. So when we surrender to Lord and engage all the organs in His service, so the demigods will also be naturally satisfied, and you don't have to endeavor to worship them separately. That is one way of looking at it. And you are actually cooperating with the demigods by using those organs in the Lord's service. And by that, Krishna describes how, by the cooperation of the living entities and the demigods, eventually you can remain in a peaceful position in this world and carry devotional activity. So, when you abide by the laws, the government protects you. When you break the laws, the same demigod, that you will get a reaction that is given by that particular department head. So demigods are like department heads. Making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a nice example Vidyadhar was imprisoning Nand Maharaj. We were discussing last week in the Bhaktivedanta course. So how Vidyadhar was liberated because Krishna touched the foot and then he was liberated. And then he told how he was cursed by the Angera Rishis. He had done some mischief, so he was cursed. So then he took permission from Lord Krishna to go back to his planet.
Just by a kick.
So all the demigods are controlling us, but when we surrender to Krishna, everybody releases us to reach him. Very nice answering it.
Hi, Giri, I have a question.
Why Shiva putting snake on his neck?
What is?
Why is Lord Shiva putting snake on his neck? You can answer, bro. You want to answer? I'll ask this. Snake represents Kala. That is my level of understanding. I'm not sure fully.
Lord Shiva worship Lord Sankarshan.
And Sankarshan is in the form of snake. I have to find out Hayagriva. I can't give an authoritative answer. I don't want to speculate. Alright, we'll conclude here. Grantharaj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.